welcome to the Wealth Renegade podcast. I'm your host, Robbie Butler. Have you celebrated your financial independence today? We have a fantastic guest today on the Wealth Renegade podcast. 2 years ago or more, I met my friend Jay Johnson, probably standing in line in a buffet at Belize. We started talking and immediately I glimpsed some of the service elements of what Jay has done in his life, military with police, but I also got to hear about his vision for where Americans can coalesce around a financial freedom that is independent, that is individually minded, and allows someone to feel their financial freedom as if it was the original American story. He and I have known each other now for 2 years, and Jay, we are so excited to have you on the Wealth Renegade podcast.
Hey, Robbie, I appreciate you having me, man.
We talked in that first conversation about some of the people you were looking to serve. And I understand that as you look at all of America, you see this opportunity in the personal finance sector. Tell us a little bit about both your backstory and how you got to see this need for financial independence.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. As far as a background, I come from a very patriotic root. When I got out of high school, I went into the military. Shortly after that, 9/11 happened and life got busy. And I remember the pride felt around the rallying cry of that and feeling like we were serving something that mattered. And I remember that. And I did that for a handful of years. And then I got out and ultimately, short story is I migrated into business and then law enforcement. The goal was always law enforcement. Business kind of just happened to be along the way. And so I've been doing that for about 18 and a half years. And through that time, through both experiences, I've been trained in a number of things. I've had a number of experiences, some good, some terrible. And I've started to enter the business background. And then as I got more astute in financial literacy, how the financial markets work, how the monetary system works, so forth, I started to see that through the lens of my public service career. And that kind of shaped where I was going or where we are going.
You mentioned that training piece. And I know one of the things that you're very keen on doing is offering arms training or things that help people understand the role of military, the role of firearms in one's personal protection. And I know your caliber of offering there is extremely high. How do you think we as Americans are doing in our financial literacy in terms of training?
If I was going to give that a grade, let's compare it to what? Let's say coming out of high school, coming into our young adulthood, probably about an F, maybe a D at best. And then by the time we reach middle, upper age adulthood, maybe we migrate to a D plus or a C minus at best. Not very good. I don't believe real financial education is taught in schools. As Robert Kiyosaki talks about all the time, it's not. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized that he's right about that particular thing. And I used to work in police work. I used to supervise a school resource program for a few years. And working with kids there, I would go we were encouraged to sit in business classes and economics classes. And that was during a period of my life that I was heavily invested into studying that stuff. And I would sit back and listen and realize, holy cow, this is just information being regurgitated from a textbook. This person largely doesn't know what they're talking about. They don't understand the inner workings. And I don't say that critically, understandably so. It is fairly complex. But I think there are things we could do that we can't invest all of a student's time into only financial education. I mean, they got to learn how to read and do math and a number of other things. But I think we could maybe condense some of the key points about the system and the way finance and investing and assets and so forth work. I think we could condense that down to where we sent them out of the public education system with a much better start towards reality, the tides they're going to face when they get into the real world.
Objectivity is so difficult to achieve in financial education and financial literacy. And yet, personal finance has the asset on its side of being able to be objective. It is fundamentally, it's math. There's a time value that you have to remember when you're doing financial math. But fundamentally, if you're earning more money on a basic level, on a principled level, you're providing more value. There's a simple relationship between how much I pay you and how much I think I'm receiving. And if, especially as you generalize that, so you remove scams and you remove issues, speculation, you get to these core principles of money and of finance that are irrefutable. Again, the basic one being, if I'm paying you more, I'm getting more value from you. As you and I have talked at length about this subject, the current financial industry struggles with objectivity. And if we were a little blunter, we would say it's horrible. There is so much agenda built into everything that's being bought and sold in the personal finance industry. Have you done any thinking about that, given your background in law enforcement and all the laws that are enacted to try and both either support or demote that necessary objectivity for personal finance?
Absolutely. And especially, you asked if I've looked at that through the lens of my law enforcement background. Yes. And as a subcomponent of that, specifically from a tactical standpoint, when you're on a critical incident, the information is constantly evolving. And information as it comes in, as new information comes in, you have to pivot a little bit. Sometimes those are large pivots, sometimes those are small pivots. But it amazes me and frankly, I'll just call it the Wall Street machinery. They have such a marketing arm behind them that it's amazing that something so big can face global pressures of many kinds, whether that's geopolitical conflict, whether that's monetary policy, interest rate policy, it doesn't matter. But as things shift, it's amazing to me how the narrative doesn't shift. And I just don't think it's reasonable that there's always only one solution, regardless of what the informational inputs are around me. So let's say, for example, today, the narrative is better get in now while you can, right? And then all of a sudden, the entire world shifts and this is a buying opportunity. Better get in now while you can. And it doesn't matter. Nobody understands the fundamentals. They go to their financial advisors, which I frankly think that term, not everybody, you can't put everybody in one bucket, but largely, I think that term should be called financial brokers because they're selling you financial products. They don't even fully understand the system. They're just telling you whatever a computer spits out that fits the thesis of the company they work for. And that's my point is I think people don't understand some fundamental things. And if they could just recognize that, does it make sense that as the entire world changes around me, the tactics I must employ never have to change? That doesn't make sense in anything.
The education, even that our financial advisors, air quotes around the term financial advisors, get is just as suspect as some of the actual advice they get. If you start to follow the common phrases that with broker dealer firms or large wealth providers all use, they all say they're about their clients. Of course, the client is first. You have fiduciary duties, you have built-in responsibilities, and so you can even have financial advisors that firmly believe they are about their clients. But that's because the issue is in the layer above them. And this does not represent independence at all. It's simply a financial advisor who's just as dependent upon what they've learned from their firm or the firm before them. And so following the threads of influence is nearly impossible. And so you have to do something to set yourself entirely outside of that experience of being led like sheep to the 60-40 stock bond split, of the 401k retirement strategy. Hey, you have all the money you need, which is apparently only $1 million at 65 years old. These traditional pieces of advice, or let's call them typical pieces of advice, layered throughout the industry. What was it for you that first woke you up to say, there's something going on here that I cannot accept any longer? I have to follow my own independent thinking.
Yeah, great question. And that was really the start of what made me dive into all this. I had a background in construction, so forth, but there was a time, and I would say it was maybe 2017 ish, somewhere in there. I noticed that the homes we were building were getting harder to put together. The deals were just getting harder. We were doing the same process over and over, but getting them through the banks, getting them through the appraisers was tougher. My wife at the time, still my wife, but my wife was at the time she was staying at home raising our kids, and so I was the only income earner. I was working. I just got a calling towards service, so I was still in law enforcement. I was running my companies, and we were doing well. We were making more money than we ever had, but it seemed like when we would look at how much we were getting ahead, that it was getting less and less, that it was getting harder, and I just couldn't make sense of that. All those things were converging at the same time. The deal's getting harder to put together. And at the same time, I was like, well, why are we making all this money and it's harder to get ahead? And that was also at the same time I started realizing, holy cow, I literally can't work any more hours a day.
Mm.
and I'm paying a ridiculous tax rate on top of this. And I thought, wow, this is something. So I just started diving in from there. I said, I just became obsessed with figuring out what causes the river to flow like it does, because we're all navigating this river. Maybe if we figured out why the currents are doing what they're doing, if we had that map, maybe we could get into the currents that were a little easier to navigate. And I just felt like I was swimming upstream, running out of energy. And so I just become obsessed with figuring out why that was and what to do about it.
That's fantastic. I think Americans are hardwired to seek independence, but there are degrees to that as well. And I think all of us imagine that journey is going to be super difficult, but it's really the difficulty is the inertia, is the fact that you were taking advice this whole time. And now you have to step into a new sphere of understanding in order to get the information you want. But the information is out there. We're talking about it right now. Our listener is sitting there listening as well and aware of the same concepts. It's only breaking the inertia that's difficult. It's not exponentially more difficult to go and listen to your Kiyosaki's, your George Gammons, your Chris Martinsons, the influencers out there who have seen the same thing. It's not harder. It just requires a little bit of inertia or you have to break the inertia to gain momentum to move in the right direction. For you, what were the resources that you tapped into early and what types of things are you listening to now?
Yeah, great question. First, people are well served to be listening to your show. That our friend Mauricio Raul, he's a securities attorney that kind of does business all over the country and big in the private placement space. Mauricio said one time on, I think it was a YouTube channel, he said, information is largely free nowadays. It's largely free. What kids are paying for or young folks are paying for at colleges is largely just the degree. But nowadays with things like this, podcasts, YouTube channels, vlogs, blogs, all sorts of stuff out there, it isn't the information that you have to go to the college to get. We've been conditioned to believe that because it's huge business. But the reality is it's all free. So I started with the one thing that really shifted my mind is nothing original, but was simply Rich Dad Poor Dad. I read that book and I was like, wow, I thought I really understood business. But what I realized is I was taking cash, I was building products, and I was turning it back into cash by selling them. So I was going from cash to asset to cash. The government doesn't reward that type of behavior. Okay. So they're going to tax the heck out of you. We learned that from our friend Tom Wheelwright in Tax Free Wealth, who's Kiyosaki's accountant. I started realizing, hey, wait a minute, the entire world shifts if I go from cash to asset to cash flow. And I hold the assets because now I'm benefiting in multiple ways. I'm benefiting income from real estate is a derivative of several things, not only cash flow from income after expenses, but amortization. Somebody's paying down your loan. You get tax benefits and you get the benefit of whether you want to call it inflation or appreciation. Depends on how you look at that. But regardless, you're getting that benefit. And so I started to realize that was just at the very surface level. There's something here I didn't know. And I just started digging deeper and deeper, I guess, is what happened. But that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, knowing what I know from our friendship over these years, you set up a community to help teach people this type of independent thinking. And I know your theme or your mission in the Code 3 Americans is enriching humanity and saving America through financial independence. What's the link there? What do you see as the fact that these types of information can free and save America?
Yeah, it goes right back to your earlier question. How are we doing on what's our grade in financial literacy? It's poor. And I realized, holy cow, that's a fatal funnel. And what that means, let me give you a little perspective. Let's say, in a SWAT call, let's say anything tactical. It doesn't matter if you're talking a military unit moving through a valley. It doesn't matter if you're a SWAT team moving through a hallway or a door. That's a funnel. Okay. In other words, it's an area that if one adversary or a small group of adversaries in a military setting, if they set up and they control that one ingress, okay, the bottom of the funnel, if you will, they can dominate a lot of things. And my whole career has been built around that. And I thought, holy cow, this is a fatal funnel. And I started objectively, I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm not anti-government, none of that. I've worked in the government for years. And I believe we need that. But we also need responsible government. And I started realizing really our government has shifted, I believe, from maybe not everyone, but most from a desire to serve, maybe people that are already in a position where they have the discretionary time to serve, to a career. It's just become about profit power and control. All you got to do is some basic math and realize, how does somebody go in making whatever, 250, 300, 350,000 a year, and they go from broke to worth $15 million in 15 years. And they're trying, and think about that. They're probably maintaining two homes. They're maintaining their home in their local area, and then they're maintaining some sort of living place in DC. Well, that's an extremely expensive area. So my point is, with two layers of expense, how much income really is $250,000 a year? It's not that much. What type of investment returns do you have to get to turn that into 15 million? That's not realistic. You and I, we're in the investing game. We know that's not very probable. Obviously, the wheels are being greased somewhere, and people could say, oh, that's conspiracy, but it's not. It's just math. The math is the path. And so I started realizing that, hey, there's a lot of people doing things for their own self-interest here, and they're going to get votes simply by leveraging the bottom of the funnel. And the funnel is going to be too many people reaching retirement age without enough stuff, without enough resources. They're not going to be able to buy food, housing, energy, whatever it is. And we're seeing that in the baby boomers. Just listen to, if you're a Dave Ramsey fan, just listen to that and say, how many people, how many Americans over age 50 got $10,000? It's not a high number. Those people are going to be dependent on medical care. They're going to be dependent on shelter. They're going to be dependent on food. And the one thing that is easy to sell, what I learned living all over the world, is basic essential needs. So I started realizing, hey, wait a minute here. This whole system, this inflationary debt-based system, is really destroying people's purchasing power. Savers, that are parents that were taught to save, and it's destroying them, and it's shoving them into this funnel where they're going to have to squeeze through this hallway or this doorway or this valley, and very few people now can control. We're putting it in a situation where 400, 500, 600 people in the entire United States can control millions. Historically, when few people take control of too much stuff, the old saying, whoever has the gold makes the rules. History tells us when too few control too much, good things did not happen.
Yep. You made a profound point just now, and I'm going to try and restate it because it's going to stick with me as well, that as a few group of people has the, let's call it at what it is at the micro level, at our level, has the sales skills to be able to sell essential goods and control by their ability to sell essential goods, housing, medical care, food, such as food stamps and other social programs, they're able to exert undue influence. And the opposite of that fundamentally is independence, being able to think for yourself, earn for yourself, provide for yourself, create for yourself. Those two ideas run entirely contrary to each other. That's not new news to anyone who's thought about these subjects, but the way you described it made me think about it differently. Thank you for that. So tell us, as we wrap up here, your community and who's the right fit to have in your community, the Code 3 Americans.
If you like wealth over poverty, if you appreciate freedom and liberty over centralized control, if you like having the freedom of movement by being outside the funnel and not being potentially even exposed to the few people that control the gate at the bottom of the funnel, if you appreciate fellowship over divisiveness in a world that's frankly fueled by divisiveness because that news sells, if you appreciate all that stuff, if you appreciate real financial education to better the life of your family, to better the life of yourself, and ultimately preserve the best country the world has ever known, that's what the Code 3 American community is. It's a totally free place people can go to collapse timeframes and access information just like you do on the Wealth Renegade, where people can go and they can tap into, like our friend Mauricio said, the information's out there, it's free, so forth. That's what it is. It's just a shortcut, so they don't have to go spend years figuring out what book to read, any of that. There's a website there. They can go, they can tap into all sorts of free resources, just like your show's free. I just think if collectively we do that as a group, through Wealth Renegade, through other friends we have that have podcasts, through the Code 3 American community, all that, we can make a world of difference in a short amount of time. That's what it is. That's the ideal fit, people that would fit that desire.
My enthusiasm for your community has been constant ever since we first stood in Belize, chatting shoulder to shoulder in the buffet line. And so I'm so glad you joined us. Thank you for your time today. And our listeners will enjoy tapping into your website, which is code3assets.com. Is there any thoughts you'd like to leave us with about this concept of American independence?
I say all the time, I've trained tactics for a long time, thousands of hours teaching tactics and survivability and so forth. And the one thing we tell new people here's a group of recruits that come into a new environment and they're just drinking from a fire hose. And maybe you have a listener on the Wealth Renegade that feels like they're drinking from a fire hose. Holy cow, how do I ever get my head around this? First of all, everything's built in small steps. Listening to one Wealth Renegade show isn't going to change your life at all. Listening to the Wealth Renegade show every week over time will aggregate to a lot. Carving out an hour in a day, 365 days a year, will in 3 years produce over 1,000 hours of education other people won't. But you have to open your mind to be willing to do the work. You have to discipline yourself that the cause is worth it. And you have to, here's what I always tell folks that are new in the tactical environment. You have to see what you're looking at. You have to tune out the noise and see what you're looking at. We're all looking. We're all hearing the same stuff on the news. But it's just going by us at 100 miles an hour. You have to discipline yourself to just tune that out and objectively ask yourself, does this make sense? Is this fundamentally a good thing, throwing this trajectory forward 30 years? Probably not. And if it's not, if that's where you land, then you should be tapping into resources that are out there via the Wealth Renegade, via the Code 3 American Community, via a number of other folks we know. And if people want to do that, we're happy to. There's free resources they can get, books, kind of special reports, videos, all that's out there. You just got to, number one, make it worth it, that it's worth my time, and then see what you're looking at, right? Take action.
Jay and I talked about objectivity. We talked about financial independence, and we talked about this American theme of being able to create and produce for yourself. This reminds me of my favorite quote by my favorite founding father, which is Thomas Jefferson, written on his memorial in Washington, D.C. It says, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." Jay, thank you so much for staying with us today, for talking through your vision for your community. And for our listeners, go and join Jay in his community at code3assets.com. You'll find your inspiration and your enthusiasm for these ideas of independence to grow.
I appreciate it, Robbie. Thanks for having me on the Wealth Renegade Show. It's what you're doing is fantastic. And in a number of ways, people should be listening to you. You're not only killing it as a young man, but you're also tied to some amazing folks. That's one of your secret sauces is you've got an ability to look at the environment around you, see what you're looking at, and find ways to bring value to the marketplace through people that can bring value to you and your following. So I think you're showing a wealth of knowledge there, and good on you for it.
Thanks, Jay.